I had to look a man in the eye. A man who had just spent 6 hours pulling a family out of a mangled wreckage on the I-95, and tell him he was being formally investigated because he'd been spotted eating a bag of salt and vinegar chips in the back of his rig. That was the moment I realised the world had tilted off its axis. Have you ever wondered why the people we rely on to save our lives seem so burnt out, so guarded, so utterly exhausted? It's not just the trauma of the job. It's not just the blood, the screams, or the long nights. It's the paperwork. It's the fact that for every life-saving miracle performed on the asphalt, there is someone sitting in a climate-controlled living room waiting to ruin a career because of a scuffed boot or a stray smile. I spent years as a senior manager for an ambulance service, and what I'm about to tell you is the side of the sirens you never see. It's the side where the heroes are treated like villains for the crime of being human. The office always smelled like stale coffee and the faint, metallic tang of ozone from the radio equipment. It was a cold, sterile place, filled with the hum of servers and the low murmur of dispatchers in the next room. For most people, that sound is a lifeline. For me, it was the background music to a slow-motion car crash of bureaucracy. My job was simple on paper. I investigated complaints. If someone had a grievance with the ambulance service, it landed on my desk. It didn't matter if it was a life or death failure, or the most mundane, petty grumble you could imagine. If they wrote it down, I had to chase it. I remember one Tuesday morning vividly. The rain was lashing against the windows, a grey, miserable sheet that made the neon lights of the city look like bleeding ink. I had a stack of files on my desk that would make most people quit on the spot. I took a sip of my third coffee, lukewarm and bitter, and opened the first folder. Inside was a letter written on heavy, expensive stationery. The kind of paper used by people who have far too much time on their hands and a deep-seated need to feel superior. The complainant was a woman who lived in one of the affluent suburbs. She wasn't complaining about medical malpractice. She wasn't complaining about response times. No, she was complaining because she had seen an ambulance crew smiling while driving with their blue lights on. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my temples. The letter read, I saw the crew smiling when they were driving along on blue lights. This is unprofessional. They are going to an ill person, so they need to remain solemn and serious at all times. Their joy is an insult to the suffering of the patient they are heading toward. Think about that for a second. Somewhere out there, 2 paramedics were pushing a multi-ton vehicle through gridlock traffic, navigating the razor's edge of safety and speed, their adrenaline spiking as they prepared to walk into a situation that could be anything from a cardiac arrest to a violent domestic dispute. And because one of them might have shared a brief, dark humour joke to keep their nerves from shattering, because they dared to show a flicker of humanity in a high-stress moment, this woman felt the need to try and get them fired. I knew this crew. It was Miller and Higgins. Miller was a 20-year veteran with hands as steady as a surgeon's and a heart that he kept hidden behind a wall of sarcasm. Higgins was the rookie, a kid with bright eyes who still believed he could save everyone. I had to call them in. That was the rule. No matter how ridiculous the complaint, the service required me to interview the staff. The service wanted optics. They wanted to be able to write a grovelling letter back to the lady on the expensive stationery, telling her that the crew had been dealt with and re-educated on the gravity of their roles. It was a lie, of course. I wasn't going to discipline them for smiling, but the process itself? The process was the punishment. When Miller and Higgins walked into my office, they looked like they'd been dragged through a hedge backward. They'd just finished a 12-hour shift that had actually turned into 14. They were covered in the grime of the road, their eyes bloodshot, their shoulders slumped under the weight of a dozen tragedies they hadn't had time to process yet. "Boss," Miller said, dropping into the chair opposite me. He didn't even wait for me to speak. If this is about the guy in the park, we did everything by the book. He was combative, we called for backup, End of story. It's not about the guy in the park, Miller, I said, sliding the letter across the desk. He read it. I watched his face. I watched the way the light died out of his eyes just a little bit more. He didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He just let out a long, slow sigh that sounded like a tire losing air. She saw us smiling, Miller whispered, shaking his head. Higgins was telling me about his daughter's first steps. I hadn't seen him all day because we were slammed. He told me she finally walked, and I smiled. I'm sorry, boss. I'll try to be more miserable next time we're rushing to a stroke victim. Higgins, the rookie, looked like he'd been slapped. Are we in trouble? He asked, his voice cracking. No, I said, and I hated how hollow the word felt. You're not in trouble, but I have to file this. I have to record that I spoke to you. I have to tick the box. It hurts, you know, Higgins said, looking down at his boots. We spent 4 hours trying to stabilize a kid last night. 4 hours. We didn't eat, we didn't pee, we just worked. And this is what people notice? That we smiled. I had no answer for him. Because he was right. The public sees the uniform, the lights, and the big white van, but they forget there's a person inside. They want us to be machines. They want us to be stoic, unfeeling avatars of medicine who exist only in the moments of their crisis and vanish the second the bill is paid. But it didn't stop at smiling. That was just the tip of the iceberg. A few days later, another one hit my desk. This one was even more absurd. A man had taken a photo of a crew parked in a supermarket lot. They were sitting in the front seats and the passenger was holding a bag of crisps. The complaint? They should not be eating at work. It is a waste of taxpayer money for them to be sitting in a vehicle consuming snacks when they should be out patrolling or cleaning their equipment. I wanted to scream. I wanted to find this man, take him by the shoulders, and explain to him that these crews don't get lunch breaks. They don't have a break room with a microwave and a water cooler. Their office is a 10 by 6 foot box filled with medical supplies and the smell of antiseptic. They eat when they can, where they can, often shoving a cold sandwich down their throats while doing 60 miles per hour toward a call. I had to bring that crew in too. A young woman named Sarah. She was one of our brightest, always the first to volunteer for the overtime shifts no one else wanted. When I told her why she was there, she just stared at me. I hadn't eaten in 9 hours, boss, she said quietly. We'd had back-to-back calls since 6 a.m. My blood sugar was so low I was starting to get the shakes. I bought a bag of chips because it was the only thing I could grab in 30 seconds before dispatch pinged us again. Do they really want me to faint while I'm starting an IV? They don't care, Sarah, I told her, and the bitterness in my own voice surprised me. They just want to feel like they're the boss of you. I felt like a traitor every time I sat them down. I was the bridge between the front line and the ivory tower, and my job was increasingly becoming a tool to break the morale of the very people I was supposed to lead. I was ticking boxes so the service could write grovelling letters. I was helping the Karens of the world feel justified in their petty crusades. But then came the complaint about the scuffed boots. And that was the one that nearly broke me. The file for the scuffed boots sat on my desk like a ticking time bomb. It seemed so small, so trivial, yet it represented everything that was wrong with the system. The complainant was a Mrs. Gable, a woman who lived in a house where the hedges were trimmed to the exact same height and the driveway was power washed twice a week. She was the kind of person who viewed the world through a lens of perfect order, and anything that disrupted that order was an affront to her very existence. She had called an ambulance because she'd had a minor fall in her garden. Nothing broken, just a bit shaken up. A crew had arrived, Jackson and Vance, two of the most professional, dedicated medics I had on the roster. They had treated her with the utmost care, helped her into her house, made sure she was stable, and even offered to make her a cup of tea. But Mrs. Gable didn't care about the care. She didn't care about the clinical expertise. She cared about their footwear. The crew that came to my home had scuffs on their boots. the complaint read, written in a cramped, aggressive hand. "This is unprofessional. They are representatives of a medical service. Their uniform should be impeccable. They should be polished at all times. To enter a private residence in such a dishevelled state is a sign of disrespect." I sighed, leaning back in my chair, the leather creaking under me. I knew exactly why their boots were scuffed. I'd seen the logs from the night before. 12 hours earlier, Jackson and Vance had been dispatched to a multi-vehicle pileup on the interstate. It was one of those nights where the sky opens up and the road becomes a river of oil and rainwater. A semi-truck had jackknifed, crushing two smaller cars beneath its weight. Jackson had spent 45 minutes on his knees in the wet gravel and mud, crawling into the twisted remains of a sedan to hold a woman's head steady while the fire department cut her out. He'd been rolling on the ground, bracing himself against the jagged metal, his boots grinding into the asphalt as he fought to keep her alive. Vance had been right there beside him, hauling heavy equipment through the debris, slipping on the slick embankment as they tried to reach another victim who had been thrown from their vehicle into a ditch. By the time they cleared that scene, they were soaked to the bone, covered in road grime, and their boots, the boots they'd polished to a mirror shine at the start of their shift, were ruined. But the calls didn't stop because their boots were dirty. The city doesn't wait for you to change your shoes. They'd gone straight from that wreckage to the next call, and then the next, until they ended up at Mrs. Gable's pristine doorstep. I called them in. I had to. The protocol was a parasite that fed on the morale of the living. Jackson walked in first. He was a tall man, usually full of a quiet, steady confidence. But today he looked brittle. He saw the file on my desk and his jaw tightened. "Is this about the lady with the garden fall?" he asked, his voice low. "It is," I said. "She's upset about the boots, Jackson." He let out a short, dry laugh that had no humour in it. "The boots. Right. Did you tell her about the interstate? Did you tell her we were literally crawling through glass and oil 2 hours before we got to her house?" "She already knows," I said, looking down at the notes. "The log says you explained it to her at the time." "I did," Jackson said, his voice rising just a fraction. "She looked at my feet while I was checking her pulse and told me I should be ashamed of myself. I told her we'd just come from a fatal accident. I told her we hadn't had a chance to breathe, let alone grab a brush and some wax. Do you know what she said to me, boss?" I waited, though I already knew the answer. She said, "That is no excuse for lack of discipline." No excuse. I was trying to save a mother of 3 from bleeding out on the pavement, and to her, that was just a lack of discipline. Jackson slumped into the chair, the same way Miller had a few days prior. It was a pattern. A slow, agonizing erosion of the spirit. These men and women were out there doing the work of angels, only to be judged by people who wouldn't last 5 minutes in their world. "I have to write the letter, Jackson," I said, hating myself. "I have to tell her that I've spoken to you. I have to tell her that we take her concerns seriously." "But do we?" Jackson asked, looking me straight in the eye. "Do we really take them seriously? Or are we just teaching people that they can treat us like dirt and will just apologize for the privilege?" I didn't have an answer for him. I was a senior manager, a leader, but in that moment I felt like a coward. I was part of a machine that prioritized the comfort of the complaining public over the mental health of its own staff. But as bad as the boots were, the next one was worse. It was a complaint that moved past pettiness into something much darker. A complete lack of logic, and a desperate need to find someone to blame for the inherent cruelty of life. A man had written in, furious because his wife had contracted an infection while staying in the hospital. Now, any rational person knows that hospitals are breeding grounds for bacteria. It's a tragic but known risk of medical care. But this man didn't want to blame the hospital. He didn't want to blame the illness. He wanted to blame us. "My wife got an infection at the hospital," the letter stated. "It is the ambulance service's fault. If your crew hadn't taken her there, she never would have gotten sick. You are responsible for her condition. I stared at the paper for a long time. This wasn't just a grumble. This was a fundamental misunderstanding of how the world works. The crew had responded to a call for a woman in respiratory distress. If they hadn't taken her to the hospital, she likely would have died in her living room. They had saved her life, and in return, her husband was trying to pin a secondary infection on the people who had given her a chance to fight it. I had to interview that crew too, a pair of young paramedics who were already on the edge of burnout. When I told them the nature of the complaint, one of them, a girl named Mia, actually started to cry. "We saved her," she sobbed, her head in her hands. "She wasn't breathing. Her husband was screaming, 'Save her, please, save her.' We worked on her for 20 minutes in that hallway. We got her back. We got her to the ER. We did everything right." "I know you did, Mia," I said, reaching across the desk to hand her a tissue. "You did a great job." "Then why am I sitting here?" she asked, her voice muffled by the tissue. "Why am I being investigated because she got a staph infection 3 days later? How is that my fault?" "It's not," I said. "But the system requires a response." "The system is broken," her partner added, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "We're out there trying to hold back the tide with a spoon, and the people we're saving are trying to trip us into the water." I watched them leave my office, and for the first time in my career, I felt a deep, physical ache in my chest. It was the weight of the lies I was telling. I was telling these paramedics that their work mattered, while simultaneously validating the people who were tearing them down. I began to realize that these complaints weren't really about boots or chips or smiles. They were about power. People felt small and helpless when an emergency happened. They felt out of control. And when the crisis was over, they looked for a way to regain that control. The easiest way to do that was to complain about the people who had seen them at their weakest. By complaining, they became the customer, the superior, the one in charge. They could humiliate the person who had saved them, and in doing so, they could erase the memory of their own vulnerability. But the cost of that power play was being paid in the souls of my staff. I was watching them turn into ghosts. They were becoming cynical, cold, and detached. They were learning that the less they felt, the less it hurt when someone threw a ridiculous accusation at them. I looked at the next file on my desk. It was a complaint about a crew driving too fast on their way to a cardiac arrest. The caller felt it was unsafe for the neighborhood. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just frustration. It was a quiet, simmering rage. I realized that if I didn't do something, if I didn't change the way I handled these things, I was going to lose every good person I had. But how do you fight a system that is designed to grovel? How do you tell the people above you that ticking the box is killing the very heart of the service? I decided that the next time a petty complaint came in, I wasn't going to follow the script. I was going to do something different. And that was when the call about the supermarket standoff came in. The supermarket standoff started with a 30-second video clip sent to our official Facebook page. It wasn't a high-speed chase or a heroic rescue. It was just a grainy, handheld shot of an ambulance parked in the back corner of a Safeway parking lot. The camera zoomed in on the driver's side window, where you could clearly see one of our paramedics, a guy named Pete, tilting a bag of salt and vinegar chips into his mouth. His partner, a young woman named Elena, was next to him, staring blankly out the windshield, chewing on a granola bar. The person filming was narrating in a hushed, indignant tone. "Look at this," a woman's voice whispered. "Your tax dollars at work. People are dying, and these two are having a picnic. Must be nice to get paid to sit in a van and snack all day. Totally unprofessional." By the time it hit my inbox, the video had been shared hundreds of times. The comments were a cesspool. "Fire them! I waited 40 minutes for an ambulance last week. Now I know why. They should be cleaning the rig if they have time to eat." I knew Pete and Eleanor. Pete had been with the service for 15 years. He had a back injury that flared up every winter, but he never complained. Eleanor was a former combat medic who had seen things in overseas deployments that would give most people nightmares. They were two of my best. When I called them into my office, the atmosphere was different. Usually the crews were tired or resigned. Today, Pete looked furious. His face was a deep, mottled red, and he was gripping the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. Eleanor just looked hollow. She was staring at a spot on the wall behind my head, her eyes distant and glazed. "I saw the video," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "We were on our 10th hour without a break," Pete snapped, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "We'd had 3 cardiac arrests in a row. One of them was a kid, boss, a 6-year-old who went through a windshield. We spent 40 minutes on the asphalt trying to get a rhythm back. We didn't get it. We had to call it. We had to tell the mom." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "We were cleared from the hospital, and dispatch told us to post at the supermarket to cover the zone. We had 10 minutes before the next call. 10 minutes. I hadn't eaten since yesterday's dinner. Elena was shaking so bad from the adrenaline dump she could barely hold her radio. So, yeah, I bought a bag of chips. I needed the salt. I needed the calories. And that woman, she stood there with her phone, laughing while she filmed us. She didn't ask if we were okay. She didn't ask if we needed water. She just wanted to catch us." Elena finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "She saw us crying, Pete, before she started filming, when we first pulled in. I was crying, I couldn't stop, and she just waited until I wiped my face. And then she hit record." The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of a service breaking. It was the sound of 2 good people realizing that the public they served didn't view them as humans, but as state-owned property that wasn't allowed to have needs. I looked at the action plan my director had sent me. He wanted a formal reprimand. He wanted me to put a letter in their file saying they had compromised the public image of the service. He wanted me to write a post on Facebook apologizing to the community and promising that measures had been taken. I looked at Pete and Eleanor, then I looked at the director's memo. And for the first time in my career, I felt a click in my brain. The box ticking was over. "Go home," I said quietly. Pete blinked. "What? Don't you have to, do the interview? The formal statement?" "I said go home," I repeated, standing up. "You've got 4 hours left on your shift. I'm calling dispatch. I'm telling them you're out of service for mental health reasons. Take the rest of the day. Get some sleep. Don't look at your phones." "But the director," Elena started. "I'll handle the director," I said. After they left, I didn't write the reprimand. Instead, I started typing a different kind of letter. It wasn't a grovelling apology. It was a manifesto. I detailed exactly what Pete and Elena had done that shift. I wrote about the 6-year-old on the asphalt. I wrote about the adrenaline, the blood, and the 400-calorie bag of chips that was the only thing keeping a veteran paramedic from passing out behind the wheel of a 3-ton ambulance. I sent it to the director. I CC'd the entire management board. And then, I did something I probably should have been fired for. I went onto the official Facebook page, and I responded to the woman who had posted the video. I didn't call her names. I didn't insult her. I just laid out the facts. I told her the timeline of their day. I told her about the calls they had been on. I told her that the picnic she witnessed was a 10-minute window of survival between life and death emergencies. I ended the post with, "Our paramedics are not machines. They are humans. If you see them eating, it is because they are hungry. If you see them smiling, it is because they are alive. We will not be apologizing for their humanity." The fallout was immediate. My phone started ringing within minutes. The director was screaming, "You can't talk to the public like that. We have a customer service image to maintain." "They aren't customers," I yelled back. finally letting the rage out. They're people in crisis, and the people we send to help them are being treated like trash. If you want a customer service experience, call a damn Uber. If you want someone to save your life, you treat them with some modicum of respect. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I'd be escorted out of the building by security by lunchtime. But something strange happened. The public, the real public, not the vocal minority of complainers, started to push back. People began commenting on my post. "Thank you for saying this. I saw a crew eating yesterday and I bought them their coffee. My son is alive because of people like Pete and Elena." The tide was turning, but the bureaucracy was a stubborn beast. Even as the public support swelled, the petty complaints kept coming in. It was like a floodgate had opened, and the more we defended our staff, the more the Karens of the city felt the need to double down. The next one was about a crew using their sirens too loudly in a residential neighborhood at 2 a.m. The complainant said it woke up their dog and was unnecessary because the roads were empty. I sat in my office, looking at the name on the file. It was a man who lived on the same street where we had just saved a grandmother from a massive pulmonary embolism. The sirens he was complaining about were the only reason the specialist team at the hospital was ready for her when she arrived. I realized then that this was a war of attrition. The system was designed to wear us down until we were as cold and unfeeling as the people complaining. Every groveling letter we sent was a white flag. Every time we ticked a box, we were telling our staff that their sacrifices didn't matter as much as a stranger's minor inconvenience. I decided I was done sending white flags. I called in the crew from the loud sirens complaint. It was Miller again, the veteran who had been caught smiling a few weeks prior. He looked even worse than before. The light in his eyes hadn't just dimmed, it was gone. He looked like a man who was just waiting for retirement, or a heart attack, whichever came first. "Miller," I said, "I have another complaint here." He didn't even look up. "Just give me the form, boss. I'll sign it. I'll say I'm sorry for the noise. I'll say I'll try to be quieter while I'm trying to keep people from dying. Just give me the pen." "I'm not giving you a pen, Miller," I said. I picked up the file and right in front of him, I dropped it into the shredder. The machine whirred, chewing the paper into tiny, meaningless confetti. Miller stared at the shredder. Then he looked at me. For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of something that looked like hope. "What was that?" he asked. "That," I said, "was a mistake. The complaint was meritless, and I'm not wasting a second of your time or mine on it. Go get a coffee, Miller. And for God's sake, if someone tells you a joke, you'd better laugh." But as much as I was trying to change things from the inside, the pressure from above was mounting. The director wasn't happy about the Facebook post, and he wasn't happy about my new approach to investigations. He called me into his office for a performance review, and that's when I found out about the secret complaint. The one that didn't go through the usual channels. The one that was aimed directly at me. The walk to the director's office felt like a walk to the gallows, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. The top floor of the headquarters was a different world. Downstairs, the walls were scuffed by gurneys and the air was thick with the smell of diesel and exhaustion. Up here, the carpets were plush enough to swallow your footsteps, and the air was filtered, chilled, and smelled faintly of expensive furniture polish. It was a place where efficiency was a graph on a screen, not a person fighting for breath in the back of a moving vehicle. Director Sterling was sitting behind a mahogany desk that probably cost more than an entire year of Higgins' salary. He didn't look up when I walked in. He was staring at a tablet, his face a mask of practiced corporate neutrality. Sterling was a man who had never performed CPR in his life. He had never had to tell a mother her son wasn't coming home. To him, the ambulance service wasn't a life-saving operation. It was a brand, and I had just set fire to that brand. "Sit down," he said, his voice as cold as the air conditioning. I sat. I didn't say a word. I just watched him. "I've been getting calls," Sterling started, finally looking up. His eyes were small and sharp, like a bird of prey. calls from the board, calls from the mayor's office, and calls from a very prominent family who donated $50,000 to our new cardiac unit last year. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It wasn't a standard complaint form. It was a legal letterhead. "The woman in the supermarket video," Sterling said, tapping the paper. "Mrs. Harrison. Her husband is a major stakeholder in the development of the North Side. She's claiming that your response on Facebook was a direct incitement of public harassment. She's received hundreds of messages calling her names, telling her she's a horrible person. And she blames you. She blames the service." "She is a horrible person," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "She filmed 2 exhausted paramedics in their most vulnerable moment, just so she could feel superior on the internet. She's not the victim here, Sterling." Sterling slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "The public is always the customer. We are a service. Do you understand what you've done? You've broken the golden rule. You defended the staff at the expense of the public image. You made us look aggressive. You made us look like we don't care about the people who pay our bills." "I made us look human," I countered, leaning forward. "Do you have any idea what it's like down there right now? Pete and Elena are heroes, and they were ready to quit because of that woman. Miller, a 20-year veteran, is walking around like a zombie because he's afraid to smile or make a sound. We are losing our best people because we treat them like disposable parts in a machine that's designed to apologize to anyone with a loud enough voice." Sterling let out a long, weary sigh. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You're too close to them. That was always your problem. You think you're one of them, but you're management. Your job isn't to protect their feelings. Your job is to manage the liability. And right now, you are the biggest liability we have." He leaned back, his chair creaking. "I've been instructed to demand a public retraction of your statement. You will write a formal apology to Mrs. Harrison. You will state that the paramedics involved have been disciplined. And then you will submit your resignation, effective immediately. If you do this, we won't pursue legal action for breach of social media policy. We'll let you go with your pension intact." I looked at the legal letter. I looked at the mahogany desk. I thought about Pete, Elena, Miller, and Sarah. I thought about the scuffed boots and the salt and vinegar chips. I thought about the thousands of tiny paper-cut wounds we inflicted on our staff every single day in the name of customer service. "What if I don't?" I asked. Sterling blinked, clearly surprised. "Then we'll fire you for cause. We'll strip your benefits. We'll make sure you never work in a management position in this state again. Is that what you want? To throw away a 15-year career for a Facebook post about a bag of chips?" I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. "It's not about the chips, Sterling. It's about the fact that you've forgotten what we actually do here. We don't sell coffee. We don't deliver packages. We save lives. And you can't do that without the people. You've turned this service into a groveling machine, and I'm done being the one who turns the handle." I walked to the door, but before I opened it, I turned back. "You want to know what the real liability is? It's not me. It's the day you wake up and there are no more sirens, because you finally managed to drive away everyone who was brave enough to drive the rigs. You'll have your public image, Sterling, but you won't have a service." I walked out of that office and I didn't look back. I went down to my desk, packed my few personal belongings into a cardboard box, and walked toward the exit. As I passed through the ambulance bay, I saw Pete. He was cleaning the back of his rig, his movements slow and methodical. He saw me with the box and stopped, his eyes widening. "Boss?" he asked, walking over. "What happened? Did they fire you?" "I resigned, Pete," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm going to go find a job where I don't have to apologize for being human." Pete looked at the box, then back at me. He reached out and shook my hand, a firm, lingering grip. "Thank you," he whispered, "for the Facebook post, for the chips, for everything. No one's ever stood up for us like that before. Don't let them break you, Pete, I said. And for God's sake, keep eating the chips. I walked out into the rain, the same grey, miserable rain that had started this whole journey. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a job. But for the first time in years, I could breathe. But the story didn't end there. You see, the thing about standing up for the truth is that it's contagious. A few days after I left, the Facebook post I'd written didn't get deleted. In fact, it went viral on a scale I never could have imagined. It reached national news. People started using a hashtag human behind the siren. Paramedics, nurses, and doctors from all over the country started sharing their own stories of the petty, soul-crushing complaints they'd had to endure. The story of the scuffed boots became a symbol. People started posting photos of their own worn-out work shoes, their stained scrubs, their tired faces. The narrative was shifting. The public was finally seeing the cost of the perfect image they'd been demanding. Back at the service, things were falling apart for Sterling. The backlash against the legal threat to me was immense. The donor's wife, Mrs. Harrison, had to delete her social media accounts because the public pressure was so high. People were protesting outside the headquarters, not for better service, but for better treatment of the staff. I was sitting in a small coffee shop about a week later when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Miller. "You won't believe it, boss," it read. "The director just issued a new memo. All petty complaints are being routed to a third-party review board that actually has paramedics on it. No more ticking the box. And we just got a new shipment of boots. They're high quality, scuff-resistant, but the memo said, 'Wear them with pride, no matter how dirty they get.' We miss you." I sat there for a long time staring at the screen. I had lost my job, but we had won the war. It makes you think, doesn't it? How many of us are working in systems that prioritize the comfort of the complainers over the well-being of the doers? How often do we let the loudest, pettiest voices dictate how we treat the people who actually keep the world turning? The next time you see an ambulance parked at a supermarket, or a paramedic sharing a laugh, or a doctor with a tired, stained coat, remember that they aren't just symbols of a service. They are people. They are tired, they are hungry, and they are doing a job most of us couldn't handle for a single hour. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you have kept ticking the boxes to save your career? Or would you have walked away to save the soul of the service? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever worked in a job where customer service went too far? Let's talk about it. And if you think the people on the front lines deserve a little more respect and a little less bureaucracy, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this one, because at the end of the day, we're all just human. And sometimes